We're going to take an opportunity to explore the concept of smart filters and to look at some of the basic things you can do with filters and blurs. I think blurs are one of the more commonly used Photoshop filters just because they're able to emulate a lot of the real world photography situations that photographers have exploited over the years to get certain looks, as opposed to many of the filters in Photoshop, which can be a little bit, shall we say, artificial looking or digitally enhanced looking. They kind of have that Photoshop look that people don't necessarily like. So I think blurs are a good place to look when it comes to filters, but this is just going to be kind of an intro look at filters and some of the features in Photoshop regarding filters. We're going to do this with a file called the hawaiianflower.psd. So go ahead and open up that file. It's a very simple file. There's no hidden channels or layers. It's just one layer. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and duplicate that to a second layer by dragging it to the new layer button as usual. And we'll call this one Gaussian blur. This is one of the most common types of blurs. It's a pixel-based blur that gives a very even blur distribution. So we'll start with that. Okay, first off, we don't want to just come in and go to filter blur. Okay, because if we do that, it's a destructive process. Yes, we've duplicated the layer, so it's not that destructive. We're not destroying the original background per se, but it's still a destructive process compared to smart layers, okay, or smart objects. So first thing we want to do is we want to go to filter and choose convert for smart filters. Okay, so by making this a smart object, smart layer, smart filter, whatever you want to call it, smart means that we're not destroying the layer itself. Okay, so let's do that. You'll notice you get the little smart layer icon, and now when we go to filter, now we can go ahead and choose the blur of our choice. There's a lot of different blurs. Let's go ahead and pick the Gaussian blur since that's what we named this. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add a fairly, that's a little too much, a fairly robust filtration, something like this, where you can't even see the flowers anymore. I picked a radius of 20. Click OK. And you notice by making it smart, if you've ever seen a filter before, you don't normally get this, but with a smart filter you do. You get an automatic layer mask, which is handy. And you get this, you get the filter itself, which becomes part embedded into the layer. So I double click on it, I can change my mind and say, oh, that's too out of focus, or I want something more out of focus. I can pick whatever value I think is good. All right, so click OK. And this is a layer mask. It doesn't look like one because it's below, but it is. I'll prove that to you. I'm just gonna go ahead and grab the paintbrush and just select it. You can see it's highlighted now. Painting with black, and look at that. That's a layer mask, right? Looks just like a layer mask. There you can see what it looks like. All right, so I'm gonna fill that with white again so that I basically erase it. And this is our smart filter. It's non-destructive. It has something that we can constantly bring up. So if we're working for a client and they say it's too out of focus, we can bring it back and change our mind without doing the whole thing again. Here's a look that photographers like, combining the sharp version, in other words, the background layer, with the out of focus version like this. Take the opacity. Like right now, this is pretty useless, right? I mean, you can't even see what it is, just a bunch of, unless you wanted to just kind of a vague background of some kind. This isn't really going to serve us too well. But if we take the opacity down a bit, look at that. Now we get this kind of dreamy 1970s fog filter kind of look where we kind of have a very soft appearance to the lighting just by adding a filter, okay? And all we did was just mix and match the sharp and the blurry. So here is zero opacity with the background layer fully visible. Here is the foreground layer fully visible. Now we got something in between, depending on how much fog we want. We can kind of dial it up or dial it back. It's very flexible. So here's another trick we can do. Let's put this back to 100%. Let's try activating a blend on this, a more specific blend as opposed to just the global opacity setting. So I'm going to right click on the layer called Gaussian blur. I'm going to choose this option called blending options. This is the layer style window that you may have seen before, but we're choosing the blending options here at the top. And this slider here is the same as this slider there that we just played with, but these sliders are different. So if I choose the underlying layer, I'm going to go ahead and just dial this down. And by moving this white point slider to the left into the shadow areas, look what happens to my image. It starts to let the lighter pixels bleed through. Anything that is above this point on the value scale is going to become visible on the underlying layer. So you can see that. But you notice it looks very sharp. If I can zoom in here a bit, you see how that transition area is very, very sharp. So what you can do as a trick is hold down that Alt Option key to separate this little pointer in half. And as I do that, I'm creating a range. So it can create kind of a gradual bleed as opposed to something that just transitions all at once. So I can bring this half of it down so it starts to fade more gradually. Now we're starting to get something that is significantly more usable. All right, so I just kind of like the way the light areas now of the flower and the highlights poke through, but the shadow areas stay dark. And this is what I ended up with. So you can see I've split this wide open. It went way up and way down. I can even move this up a little bit more. But you see now by splitting the pointer, I'm able to get this really soft transition from the highlights to the shadows. I kind of like that, as opposed to just doing, you know, a complete opacity shift like we did before. This gives me, depending on the photo, of course, this gives me a different look. For this photo, I think it works very well. So I kind of like that. All right, so I'm going to have you disable this layer while we explore some other things. So rather than throw it away, I want to be able to see that you've done this. So leave it, don't throw it away. Just turn off the eyeball so it's no longer affecting the background layer. All right, take the background layer and let's drag it to a new layer button. So we're going to make another duplicate, and we'll call this one a zoom blur. We're also going to make it smart. So we're going to go to the filter menu and choose convert for smart filters. And this time we're going to go down to filter blur once again, but we're going to choose something called a radial blur. What is a radial blur? Well, it's two different things. One is a spin, which creates this look. See if I can preview this. Oh, it doesn't have a preview option, this one. Fun. Okay, well, here's what it looks like. Okay, it spins it. All right, I'm going to undo that. Actually, I don't have to because it's a smart filter. I can just double click on it. Let's do it that way so I can prove to you. There we go. Now let's do a zoom. Okay, I'm going to do a zoom, which is what we named this. And that's a very different look. And what I do is I position this. You see that those intersecting black lines here in the middle? You see that? I'm positioning this where I want it in the image. So if I want this to kind of center on the flower, that's where I want to choose. Choose best quality. Don't choose draft. Choose best. And we're going to choose zoom, and this will determine the amount. I'm going to leave it at 63 just to see what happens. Let's see what happens. Click OK. Boom. Very different look, right? So you can see the center of the zoom is right about here. So I targeted it fairly well. Maybe I can move it up a little bit more, but I get these streaks of light, and this is what we call a smash zoom. So if you are a photographer, you can get this look by using a zoom lens and then using a slower shutter speed and then zooming the lens as you take the picture. And you get this kind of smash zoom look, which is kind of fun. But Photoshop is a lot more controllable. And of course, through smart filters, it's even more controllable because if I want to move this up a bit, I can. And I can just click OK. And now you can see it zooms from that area. I just double click again and keep going at it until I'm happy with the results. And I kind of like that positioning. That looks good. But you get these dramatic streaks of light, which is fun. Now, I can even change the amount. So like, let's say it's not as long as I would like. I'm going to increase that and make it even more dramatic. Let's take advantage of this layer mask. Let's go ahead and just paint some. I'm going to use a very soft brush, take the hardness way, way down, and just gradually sort of fade this. So I can see that flower a little bit better. Just kind of put that there. And now I still have the streaks of light on the part of the image that aren't so important, but I'm able to see the flower. A lot of fun. I like that. Okay. So again, just like we did with the Gaussian blur, if you want, you can drop down the opacity and just say, okay, I want some of that to bleed through, and you can kind of mix and match it. But I kind of like this with the streak, so I'm going to leave it like that. But that's basically just a few little pointers there on smart objects, smart layers, and blurs. We'll be taking a look at some other types of blurs with lenses later down the road, but for now, go ahead and save this with these two layers intact, and we'll see you on the next lesson.